Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to launch this very special series of lectures curated by our former student, Harry Woodlock, called Vital Exhaustion, Late Capitalism and the Crisis of Pain. This will be a weekly series of artworks, essays, conversations, examining the social and political origins of the current mental health crisis through the lens of contemporary visual culture. And Harry is pleased to acknowledge the support of the Arts Council of England. First of all, of course, I must thank the Research Forum for helping us facilitate this evening, in particular Fern Irish, the programme manager, Grace Williams, the digital producer, who's behind the scenes, of course, helping us with everything, and Acacia, who's been administrating everything so splendidly. Our most distinguished guest this evening is Arnaud Esquerre from the CNRS, the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique in Paris. He's also attached to the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, which we can call the EHESS. And Arnaud, together with Luc Boltansky, has written the book we're going to be discussing tonight, Enrichment. Now, I had a wonderful talk this morning with Arnaud, not only about enrichment, which came out in with Polity Press in 2020, after its launch in France as L'Enrichissement in 2017. But I must tell you that he's a very special kind of sociologist. Because let me just run through the translated into English titles of his publications. He began in 2009 with the publication of his doctoral thesis about mental manipulation and the sociology of sects. In 2011, Bones, the Ashes of the State. In 2013, Astrology in the 21st Century. In 2016, Extraterrestrial Events. Arnaud is a UFO specialist for France. In 2019, his most recent single-authored book, Don't Look, Sex, Violence and Freedom of Expression in the Cinema. Now, of course, he told me that behind every book is the second book lurking, and all these relate to more evident sociologists' preoccupations with issue of the state, law, power, citizenship, and of course their opposites like disempowerment, which we'll be talking about today. But I just want to say one other special thing about Arnaud before we go on to the question of co-authorship, because we're really welcoming two authors here tonight. And that is, in case you thought that Arnaud was not sufficiently engaged in the art world, that he's actually been a performer in two events around, art pieces, if you like, by Tino Sehgal, that very, very famous English-born Berlin-based artist. In 2009, he was in a performance in the Marion Goodman Gallery in Paris, which was called This is History, about 2007, which was supposed to be a kind of huge living history painting. And in 2016, I always think Tino Sehgal's participants prance around. So I'm going to hazard that Arnaud pranced around the vast stretches of the Palais de Tokyo. I'm so sorry I didn't see this show, which was full of Tino Sehgal's own choices of contemporary artists, such as Philippe Perreno or Daniel Buren. So writing about enrichment and commodity, Arnaud is familiar also with the concept, which is so important for us, of dematerialized art and the non-commodification of avant-garde, or potential non-commodification of avant-garde practice. But we must introduce, of course, the second and senior figure, authorship-wise, Luc Boltansky, born in 1940. And for art historians among us, it's interesting that Luc is the elder brother of the well-known artist Christian Boltanski. And he, of course, didn't pioneer co-authorship, but for example, wrote the very celebrated book, The New Spirit of Capitalism, published in English in 2005 with Yves Chiapello. He also collaborated with Laurent Thévenot on 1 or 2 publications. And this morning we discussed the actual process of collaboration, which means that in fact, the input in every paragraph is actually a kind of co-product. And in fact, in the course of their lunches together, Luc Boltansky and very, very fertile, this couple, and Arnaud Esquerre produced a different book because they were discussing the very worrying rise of the right in Europe. And that second book they authored together in 2014 was about the rise of the extreme right all over Europe. So so the person who's going to be, as it were, the interlocutor and respond to enrichment, because it's touched him so much in his own practice, is our own Harry Woodlock. And when I say our own Harry Woodlock, this is because Harry came to the Courtauld and did an MA with Julian Stalabras in 2017, very closely related to today's concerns. It was called After Sensation, Neoliberalism and the Pathology of the Social Bond, which led straight into his first very major show, curated with the curator of Sensation, the retired Royal Academy director, Norman Rosenthal, and that was called Breathless, which is going to be the subject of another of our discussions, held at Ciarpesaro in Venice in 2019, where despite my best Vaporetto efforts, I was prevented by floods from seeing it, but Harry's going to show us it tonight. So just a little tiny bit, not of housekeeping, but just to tell you what's going to happen. Arnaud is going to present his book and his ideas briefly. Then Harry is going to respond. Then I'm going to say a little bit, possibly picking up, I hope, on various issues. And while that's happening, Harry is going to be looking at the chat to select questions from the audience. And then there's going to be plenty of time for the audience to ask questions themselves, and we hope have a very lively discussion. So thank you very much, and over to you, Arnaud. And we're really delighted to welcome you, beaming to us from Paris, France, 1 hour later. Welcome, Arnaud.
Thank you, Sarah. This morning we spoke in French, and my English is less good than Sarah's French, but I will try to speak in English with you. So this is a book which I wrote it with Luc Boltansky, which called Enrichment. And let's start with Torino in Italy, because Torino was an industrial city where cars were manufactured, and cars are a typical standard product, which is very important for us, because we call this, we have an attention to this standard form, which is at the core of industrial mass production. And in this kind of industrial mass production, things are reproduced from a prototype. There are differences between the prototypes, but not between the things. And that's very important for us. And the other things which is very important, it's that price of industrial things will diminish as they go from new to used. And that is the top of the building. In the 50s, there were a road where cars were tested. And this is the top now. On the top of the building now, there is a museum built by Renzo Piano with the art collection of the proprietor of Fiat. And our reflection, we think what happens? What happens between the beginning of the century with some cars and with the beginning of this century with the building, which is a museum built by Renzo Piano. And this kind of transformation is, you can see it in other cities like Lens in France. That was an industrial city too. And you have now the Louvre Lens, which is built by the Japanese architects Sana. This is Lens. But this is not only with urban space, but with also rural space that we can see some transformation. And in the book, we talk about Aubrac, the region Aubrac. This is in the south of France. It's very lovely, as you can see. And it was, and now you have a gourmet restaurant with very rich people who are in the restaurant, not now because there is the COVID, of course, but, and you can contemplate the landscape. And in this small village, there are some knives, which are on-craft knives, and they are sold with a certificate of authenticity, which enriches the knife with a narrative of the past. This is a knife, but something which is very, which is a trouble for us, it's that this uncrafted knives, they were very different in the 19th century. So what we think that it was a very big transformation in the narrative, which is with this kind of things. It's very important. So enrichment. The first meaning of enrichment is that there is a growth with rich people's fortune, but there is a second meaning. This second meaning, this is things enrichment. It designates the operation that things undergo with a view to increasing their price. And you can see at Lyell, the craftsman is shown at work as in an ethnographic museum. And this kind of man, this kind of craftsman, we saw it in Louis Vuitton exhibition. You saw it's very far. At the Louis Vuitton exhibition, the craftsman is shown at work as in an ethnographic museum. This exhibition, Louis Vuitton was at the Grand Palais 5 years ago. So we think that we can say that there is something like the enrichment economy, combines activity of luxury, heritage, art, culture, and tourism. And this kind of economy is very different from the industrial economy because it exploits narrative from the past and it's based on what we call the collection form. So if we return to the Louis Vuitton exhibition, on the top, on the left, you can see it's Luc Boltansky, my co-author. And street cases are displayed as collectibles. It's not like only street cases, it's also collectibles. And Louis Vuitton has asked contemporary art design to design suitcases. Here you can see the suitcases designed by Damien Hirst on the center of the image. So we think that we can talk about form of valuation to analyze the commodities. There's two principal aspects to understand this kind of form of valuation. The first aspect concerns the differences between the things. And we think that you can presenting the things with two kinds of presentation. A form of presentation with characteristics that we call analytical presentation, and a presentation with a narrative, and we call it narrative presentation. And the second aspect, which is very interesting for us, it's the trade potential. Because with the standard form, the price decreases over time, but the price can also increase over time. So there is here two modalities, and by combining these possibilities, we get 4 forms of valuation. The standard form, we saw it before, which is very important because it's the first form. The collection form, which is very important for us in the enrichment economy, and 2 other forms. I don't talk about it today. The trend form and the asset form. Not too much, just a little bit. So in the this is how we can analyze the 4 forms of valuation. This is the analytic presentation, the structural schema of the standard form. But the second form, which is in the core of my topic today, it's a collection form. This form prevails on the economy of luxury, heritage, art and culture, tourism, activity that had been grouped under the term as enrichment economy. And we call it a collection form because it generalizes a form initially shaped by the practices of collectors. The first form is a trend form, which is prevalent in the fashion world. It is a form with narrative structure. And we have 4 forms. This is an asset form. You can have a work of art, for example. It can be sold to make a profit, and it's typical of the asset form. And there are some displacement between form of valuation. The things are not permanently assigned to a form of valuation, but they can migrate from one to another. And I will take an example, which is a table. This is the table Central by Jean Prouvé. It was designed for a school cafeteria in the university campus of Antony in Paris. And it was like a waste, in fact. But it has been sold to an American collector at the price of €1 million 6 years ago. So it's like an asset now. It's an asset, in fact. In this kind of economy, There are workers which are very important, and we call it the creators. These workers in the enrichment economy depend on multiple employers, and they are valued by their reputation. So they are subject of a double uncertainty on their reputation and on their future activity. They live in a common world, which is at the same space a very strong competition, and at the same time a world of very strong selection. And each creator tends to self-exploit, since it's itself the company on which its survival depends. So that's very important to understand this kind of economy, but maybe Ari will talk about it. And something which is very important to understand the place of the creator is that it's on the core of the enrichment economy, but they are very exploited and very in situation of very precarious. And I will end with the pandemic of COVID-19, because maybe it's a crisis of the enrichment economy. Enrichment economy is very fragile because it presupposes very strong conditions of social stability and security. And the pandemic changes the economic functioning, but I think it's penalized strongly the enrichment economy. Why? Because tourists can't move. The manufacture of luxury goods is low rate. Museums are closed, or if they are open, the number of visitors is limited. So there is a crisis of enrichment economy, but the enrichment economy has already changed, and maybe it will continue to change. Because the principle is that enrichment economy exploits the narrative of the past. So maybe the goods, the commodities in the enrichment economy can be sold more online. So it's a possibility, and which is very specific on this enrichment economy is the importance of the luxury brand. And of course, when you have some international luxury industry, you can sell things in states where economic activity is performing better than in Europe, like China. Well, it's a very short abstract of the book, so I hope it was clear. And so
Thank you so much, Arnaud. I think we're passing now to Harry. And Harry, you will tell us how, when you read the book, it really inspired you, and how you wanted to put chapter 14 of it, which is the last chapter before the conclusion, about precarious work into our portfolio for future readers. And Harry, how does this relate to your own work as a young curator in London and globally?
Great, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Perfectly.
Okay, cool. As Sarah already mentioned, of course, this event marks the launch of Vital Exhaustion, Late Capitalism and the Crisis of Pain, which is a new online series which seeks to examine the social, economic, political origins of the mental health crisis through the lens of contemporary visual culture. Sarah and I began this series about, or a discussion for this series about 2 years ago, shortly before I began my MA at the Courtauld Institute in 2016. I'd experienced my own mental health struggles. I think, like a lot of people at that time, I'd begun to ask myself why I felt the way I did. It was by no means a quick process at all, but before long I became aware of this body of research. I suppose it began with texts by authors such as Johann Hari, Gabor Mate, and Bruce Alexander. But soon enough, I was led to the work of figures such as Emile Durkheim, Charles Darwin, and Karl Marx. Again and again, I would keep on coming back to this one word, which was capitalism. I knew this word, but I wasn't able to describe it in any way. I remember reading an article by Georges Monbiot in The Guardian, where he suggested to the reader, imagine if the people in the Soviet Union had never heard of communism, and yet the ideology that dominates our lives here has, for most of us, no name. And I was drawn to the work of Luc Boltansky and Yves Chiapello, their monumental text, The New Spirit of Capitalism, and this central theme, this way in which capitalism evades critique, the way in which it kind of thrives when it's hidden from the senses. And I began to understand that one of the key ways to resist that existed within language itself, and more specifically within critique. So for me, enrichment feels like one of the most kind of rigorous, up-to-date analyses of capitalism, and makes such a clear case for why we so urgently need to move to regulate it. More specifically, for me, chapter 14 seems especially pertinent as an examination into why the subordination of social life to the economy has had such a devastating effect on young creators, and the practice and presentation of contemporary visual culture today more broadly. And whilst enrichment isn't necessarily an inquiry into the origin of the mental health crisis, I hope this work in the context of the wider programme will demonstrate the role political economy plays in this crisis. So I'm going to talk about this in relation to in relation to critique, certainly, but in relation to a recent curatorial project that I organised in Venice with Norman Rosenthal, who was, of course, the former director of the Royal Academy of Arts in London, and who curated or co-curated the exhibition Sensation, which was this really seminal moment for the young British art movement in London, and Elisabetta Barrisoni, who was the director of Carpezero, the International Gallery of Modern Art, where we did the show. The exhibition was a survey of contemporary British art in collaboration with the British Council and Fondazione Musei Civici di Venezia. And we exhibited, it was about 16 emerging artists living and working in London, including works by Anthea Hamilton, Eddie Peake, and Nicola Duché. I think the place to start actually is the title, because there was a tremendous amount of contestation about the title, bearing in mind that this opened in October last year through until March. And my goodness, I don't think any of us at the time thought, everything that's happened. I think certainly we had the floods in Venice, which were devastating, and then the coronavirus and protests and all of the rest of it in that period. But there was a lot of back and forth about the title, and at that moment, the subject that was dominating was, of course, Brexit, and it had been suggested at one point out the title referring to sort of in-out referendum, but we managed to agree on, it was Senza Respiro, which translates to breathless in English, and the idea of that really was to kind of grasp a kind of a feeling or an experience of what it is to live and work and be an artist or a young creator in London today. And, I really sort of wanted to fight for that, because I understand that Brexit has dominated and all of the rest of it, but the thing that really dominates, what has dominated for me, what has dominated for my contemporaries is just this widespread feeling of loneliness, depression, anxiety, of breakdown everywhere. And everywhere I looked, I could see it in the work that was being presented here in this exhibition. And I think that occurred on 3 different levels, actually. It's only a really, really short presentation because I know we don't have time or much time, but I wanted to talk about it in relation to 3 artists. The first is Channa, who did these, they're called Crustacean Satellites, which you don't get the full sense of it here, but there were these amazing hanging mobiles of these metallicized crab shells. You can see some are metallicized, some are just as she found them. They hang on these amazing steel rigs. And I think, obviously the environment crisis dominates a lot. And we're looking at this, constantly looking or seeking to examine this tension between the natural world and humanity, and that which drives humanity and pushes us forward, and industrialization, and the way we sort of exploit and consume and abuse nature. The second example is actually in this same image, where it's an amazing oil work by a young emerging artist called Izzy Wood. And it's actually an image of an Easter chocolate bunny. And I was really, really fascinated by this because, I'm sure she won't mind my saying, but we had a conversation. And for me, I have slightly strange sort of tics sometimes, and I've had this sort of strange obsession with Easter bunnies from supermarkets when I felt like I need hope. Chocolate and that sort of rush, it allowed me to sort of break away from the madness moment, and became this point of like really extreme obsession. And it was a sort of similar thing for her that she was exploring in the work. She was exploring sort of ways of coping under late capitalism, really. And then the third, oops, just getting, am I getting, there's notes. The third, sorry, is, why have we gone back? Prem Sahib. This one here, sorry, which these amazing, they're hoodies in these kind of glass sculptural frames. And Prem is really, really interested in queer nightlife in London, for example, queer subcultures, queer spaces. And here he's looking at the kind of exploring the tactility of male bodies through these hoodies, which are suspended in these frames, and you kind of want to touch them, and you can't access that tactility, that sensation. And I think he's sort of pointing towards the state of the city more broadly, and the ways in which capitalism has transmogrified over the last few decades, the loss of social space, the loss of connection with one another, and all of the rest of it. So these ideas just kind of came together in this exhibition, and I think I want to talk about this. Maybe just leave this up while I'm talking about it in relation to enrichment. I was really interested then in this idea of visibility, and going back to what I was saying about Arnaud's work originally, and about critique, and critique being this really powerful thing at the level of language. But I came to start thinking about that in relation to visual culture. And if capitalism is this thing that sort of evades critique by being invisible, I was interested in this idea that the mental health crisis responds to a specific set of social, economic, and political circumstances, of which, of course, capitalism sits right at the center. And if capitalism itself is rarely directly available to the senses, then giving form to the mental health crisis in all its forms by contemporary visual culture is, in a certain way, giving a form of visibility to capitalism itself. I think for me, that's really, really crucial, because that's the point that you can begin to generate a critique of it. And you know, to sort of go around the houses a bit, you know, there's so much here with enrichment and Arnaud's work, but I was really interested in relation to the chapter, which of course is up now on the project space, and I hope you'll get a chance to read it, about creators in the enrichment economy, how hard it's become, and crucially the effect of the economy has on our ability to generate these kinds of critiques, so that we might, you know, regulate an iteration of capitalism in our own time that works for us. And there's, I'm not sure if we've got time, because I know we've got to. Yeah, we don't, but there's a really, anyway, on super amazing passage where you identify these three key problems about generating this critique as creators. And I really urge anyone who has a creative practice, or not, anyone who just feels totally disenfranchised under this system, to read this, so we can kind of begin to understand ways in which we can resist it. And it's, you know, it's a huge conversation, and we don't have enough time here, and I'm dying to hear what Sarah has to say and her takeaway. So I will pass back over to her now. But yeah, it's really a fabulous work, Arnaud. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I've come back. Yeah, well, I read this with great fascination. And while Harry sent me chapter 14 in English, for the time being, I only had access to the whole work in French. And I was very interested in a work that was so enormous, with such narrative fluidity through its 14 chapters and more, in its method, in its self-proclaimed methodology. Now, I firstly want to put in a compliment I forgot to give in my introduction. When the book was reviewed in the New Left Review, and there was a dialogue, I mean, the two authors responded to this review, but it was quite important, I think, that the conclusion was that enrichment capitalism had become a critical object, supplanting inevitably the prior notion of industrial capitalism. I don't think that can apply to the whole of China or other places. It's not a global idea, but even as a European idea, I think it's very important. There are like three big things I'd like to say in response. One thing is that the method of going about this analysis, the authors define as pragmatic structuralism. And they quote Claude Lévi-Strauss, who says, behind every structure lurks another structure. But of course, while the main object is not only the luxury industry, but the art market and all the precarious workers who shore it up, including, of course, all the people we are training at the Courtauld, you know, a first-year BA student paying enormous fees, coming straight from school and locked up in wherever they're living at the moment, is an extraordinarily precarious position compared with the museum directors we've produced, or whatever, or the auctioneers, or anything to do with the art market. But as art historians who often indulge in our own practices, in, you know, moments of anthropology or ethnography, my own students, we like this idea of ethnographic conceptualism, for example, I find the very horizontal approach to this contemporary analysis of a France, which is now the pre-COVID France, rather troubling, and in fact contradicted by the long history, in fact the 30-page history of La Guillole, the knife factory. We discussed this, and when we discussed it, Luc said to me something very interesting. He said that I'm a Wittgensteinian at heart, and the way I don't go into the past, which I don't feel qualified to interrogate to do with the dead or whatever is an act of humility. Now, I'm just thinking that what is problematic for me is that that attitude would really not work in art history. What I like very much is the idea that we can juxtapose an analytical narrative, an analytical presentation, which is almost like the idea of a formalist analysis, with this idea of the récit in French, the narrative presentation. And of course, all our own practice as art historians is based on telling stories, on, you know, the value added of Picasso's story to a Picasso or whatever. So I'm really, really keen on that. But when it gets to precarity and the whole infrastructural world, Arnaud did in fact agree with me that there is quite a big blind spot in the book, and indeed in its index of names. There's a very, very useful and very welcome index of names and an index of concepts at the back of the book, at least in the French version. And there aren't very many women around at all. And yet, if you think of the Courtauld, and Arnaud said, aha, I should come and do a book about the Courtauld. I said, yes, please, Arnaud. When we have 8 females and 1 male in every class, which does not play out in the power relationships 15 or 20 years onwards, I think this is a big question about the precariat. So the precariat, that's a wonderful French word that I think we've adopted now when we talk about precarity and precarious intellectuals. The other thing is that I read the whole book before the Tino Segal revelation this morning, whereas last night I was thinking about the seminar I'd had where much of the art we discussed was deliberately immaterial, has deliberately vanished and is not saleable. We were discussing, for example, Michel Journiac's Guillotine on the front of Libération, which he did as not only a sculpture, but a one-page photograph when France was happily guillotining people in 1977. And also his banknote, his 100-franc banknote with a great big red wound in the middle that he gave out to people at the time of AIDS. I mean, a deliberate gesture to do with money and art and capitalism and circulation. And it seems to me, of course, I am a bit of a romantic, as we all know, but there is such a thing as art with a capital A that actually transcends the commodity nature of art, which I'm not wanting to discuss at the moment per se, but unless one had leaders such as Joseph Beuys at a certain moment with his idea of social sculpture, where everything is art, such as Duchamp, whose impact has been extraordinary through the 20th and 21st century, without certain leaders who had a different and non-commoditized idea of art, you wouldn't actually have the trickle-down world of commodities. So I just wanted to both convey the compliment from the Great New Left Review that this book has actually, I think, which is the greatest compliment in the world, Arnaud, engendered a paradigm shift in the study and discussion of capitalism, with this new phrase, enrichment capitalism and enrichissement, and actually just throw those ideas into the pool. My questioning of pragmatic structuralism, the problem of gender, the immaterial dimensions of art, and, if you like, conceptual or immaterial practice. We also talked about the lack of desire or jouissance, French, you know, in the enjoyment, those kind of emotional things, and indeed aspiration in the book, because every single, you know, poor cultural worker, or you talk a lot about lower middle class art practices as well as high end, has some kind of aspirational idea. So does every failed art student who wants to go to an art school. So I think that those elements are there. And I just wanted to end with something I've always found rather funny, because I could have showed images, but I thought you'd have too many, really. And that is Luc Boltansky's first publication, which was very provocative, of course, in 1966, right at the height of French responses to pop art in its midst, was called Le bonheur des Suisses, the happiness of the Swiss. And 30 years later, almost, his brother Christian responds with the huge installation, The Dead Swiss, which was something that, with a huge publication with all the names of the people who died in a certain French canton, which was kind of excluded from the contemplation of the happy Swiss. So bearing in mind, there's a lot about Rolexes and the manufacture of Louis Vuitton's luxury watches in Switzerland. I just wanted to get back to that very moment and that juxtaposition of the fact that all art is about, is a memento mori. Every Louis Vuitton watch in 200 years' time, ticking or dead, will be a kind of memento mori of this epoch. So anyway, thank you, Arnaud, and thank you for this great paradigm shift. Perhaps Harry has been busy soliciting questions, and I can see in my chat that some of them are very, very long. So
yes.
Have you been able to sort out some questions, Harry?
Yes. No, there's some really, really interesting questions, and I think there's a very interesting question from Pierre. It's long, but let's give it a go. Pierre says, in the chapter shared with us today, you describe some counterintuitive and perhaps counterproductive behaviors of precarious workers participating in the cultural industries. For example, their propensity to blame the abstract system like neoliberalism, capitalism, etc., for their condition, rather than develop practical responses. This is in absence of easy to navigate power and management structures, the difficulty of labor organizing, etc. This strikes me as odd, given that cultural workers are often astute critics of both the politics of cultural industries, the system, and of the institutions with which they interact. The pandemic has made that clear. So the question is, could you speak to the mechanism that shapes cultural workers' application or lack of their critical capabilities to their own participation in the enrichment economy and its institutions? And what point is a practitioner implicated in the institution to the extent that they cannot offer a critique?
Okay.
That was a long question.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Ari. It's very big questions, and it's very, I'm not sure I can respond in a few minutes because it's too big. And first, I would say that Sarah, you mentioned the New Left review, and we have a dialogue with Nancy Fraser in the
Indeed.
New Left, which was very critical because she thinks that capitalism, what we talk about with enrichment economy, she said, it's not so important than financial capitalism. And of course, our analysis is that's not all form of capitalism. It's a kind of capitalism. We think it's very important in our world. That's why I show some transformation with cities and some region like Aubrac, because you can see the transformation, which is very important, but it lacks some statistic to show the importance of this kind of economy. And with Luc, now we are working with the French Ministry of Culture to try to build this kind of statistics. And you are absolutely right about the gender. It lacks an analysis on the place of women in our books. It's our fault, and I hope, but it's like a programmatic book. Even it's a big book, it's like a programmatic book. And I hope that someone will work about the place of women in the enrichment economy and the precarious place of this woman. It's very important. And well, about the immaterial conception of art, our analysis is about the commodities, and it's not all kind of art. And of course, there's immaterial conception of art, like Tino Segal work, Tino Segal's work, but and it's not in the book, but it's something like which it can be even in the enrichment economy, because you have some visitors or you have some collectors with this kind of art, even with Tino Segal, which has which have galleries, and he is in museums, and it's not free for the museums, as you know. And
I was just going to say, shall I summarize the point that Pierre made? Because Harry read out this very long thing. I think you can read it on the chat, but it's saying that some of these most precarious people are very well aware of their place within institutions and very capable of critiquing institutions, as opposed to being just kind of, you know, chiffres, numbers of people who pass through, who happen to be unfortunately precarious. He said, the last paragraph said, could you speak to the mechanism that shapes their application or lack of their critical capabilities to their own participation in the enrichment economy and its institutions? I mean, some people, you know, they're very aware of that whole thing. And of course, if you're, supposing you're like a lead violin player in an orchestra, which is now not performing, so you're precarious, you've chosen to spend hours and hours and hours of practice, not for very much material reward. It's just, I mean, the question is not about omissions on your part, it's about the self-consciousness of the objects of your analysis.
Yes, but about the critic, our book, it says to be critic, you have to know where you are with the capitalism. To be critic of the capitalism, you have to know where you should know. You need to know where you are with this kind of capitalism. And if you think that capitalism it's only industrial economy or financial capitalism, you are missing the point, which is there something which is enrichment economy. And if you are an artist, a critic of capitalism, you are in this economy. And our book is, if you want to be critic, and if you want to change, for example, how to distribute the benefits in this kind of economy, you have to have the self-conscience of your place in this economy. You are not outside, you are inside. But how to do to transform the relationships when you are inside? And that's the point. That it's because when we start to work, someone say, but you know, pieces of art that have no price. But of course, they have price. Even contemporary art in museums, they have an assurance price when you have an exhibition. there's some price.
So excuse me for interrupting, Arnaud, but we've only got 5 minutes left officially, but we have got another 10 minutes, which is wonderful. So Harry, you are going to be chairing the questions. Can you select your next question, please?
Of course I can. A question from Patrick. I found your presentation very interesting. Whilst you say, and we have not touched on this, and we need to, the enrichment economy is changing because of COVID-19. I was wondering if you also felt any optimism for how we can reset the crisis of capitalism for creators after the pandemic. What opportunities does this provide us?
Well, I don't know, but I think the problem is that in this kind of crisis, to maybe the good thing is that maybe it's that artists, creators can be more productive and think about the world where we are, maybe. But something which is very difficult is the precarious situation of this kind of artist, and it's very hard because, for example, in France, for the artist, it's very difficult because there's with this crisis, this kind of economic crisis. So it's the situation of precarious is growing, I think. So that's difficult.
Harry, we got a great question at the bottom. Would you like to read it out from Carla Kessler?
You go for it.
Okay, this is really pertinent, I think, because it links up vital exhaustion and enrichment economy. From Carla Kessler, how does the wellness economy, or to put it more grimly, the wellness industrial complex, intersect with the enrichment economy? I.e. spas and things. One could point to Therm Art Project, for example. I don't know if Arnaud, what do you think about this? About the feeling of bien-être, you know, wellness is this newly coined word for all the idea that everybody must be, well, again, as you point out in your book, everybody must be slim, beautiful, green, well-loved and loving themselves.
But it's like the critic. It's something like a contradiction, because it's a very contradiction between you have to. The reputation is very important for this kind of in this kind of economy. So the wellness is very important, but in the same time, the pressure is very hard, and because between private life and the work, it's together, you know. So there's no border between the both, and it's a very hard question. So I'm not responding exactly at the question, but it's a big question, I think.
Harry, next question, please.
It might also just be worth at that point, we have our next actual contributor to the program early next week is the young artist Ed Forney-Ellis, and we look a lot at that, the idea of well-being and the wellness industry in relation to these ideas. So another reason to follow the program. One from Thea. How do you deal with the problematic role of philanthropy in funding art and art projects that cannot be sold? She mentions whitewashing and corporations like Sackler, for instance. Where does that come into the research and the enrichment economy?
I'm not sure I understand the question, which is, can you?
There are many art projects which result in experiences or installations that cannot be sold, cannot have a subsequent price put on them, but that need philanthropic or indeed state or institutional funding. And sometimes with, for example, Sackler, or in England, we have a lot of problem with oil companies like British Petroleum. There are very negative things like opiates or oil or military research behind, which are huge industrial complexes. In fact, even Vuitton, is not very innocent. There are all sorts of things behind the ephemeral superstructural event of art.
Yes, but it's the same problem. It's how art is have linked with some industry, and of course the luxury industry is very important now, but it's a different kind of industry, and I think it's very difficult because they have some benefits to do this kind of philanthropic actions in art and with some artists. So I think it's very hard because it's a contradiction there between the use of this kind of money to build some artistic project, and if you don't accept this, it's like the problem of the precarious situation when we talked before of it.
Yeah. So next question, Harry. We only got time for one or two more. What would you like to choose?
Let's take one more before we get kicked out. So one from Addy's just come in. Does this mean we need to rethink or continue to, as it is already happening, the role of a curator / artist and art professionals? Should we refocus on responsibility towards constituencies and each other, which is the counteraction to neoliberal capital thinking? So I think it's a case of it's sort of trying to find, I think, solutions now to the problems that you raise in the book. And I think that's the thing, as a young curator myself, as a creator, I should say, I find really, really difficult. And I think one of the things that the program is trying to address, it's about etiology or kind of cause, but as much as that, it's about gathering information, I think, to find solutions. And I think, Arnaud, a question that I would put to you is, particularly there's those three issues that you raise in the chapter about reasons why it's difficult to formulate a critique. In your work and your feedback, since, because in French at least, it's been 3 years since you put this work together, and I'm sure you've had a lot of feedback. Have some solutions, coronavirus aside, but have some solutions emerged in response to, I think, the very, very articulate points you make in this chapter?
I think something which is very difficult is that, as we said, the curator, there's a very hard competition between this kind of between curators, between artists, and so on. But if you want to change the redistribution of profits, you have to be united to lead a fight. You have to be collective, and it's a very hard contradiction between the competition and to be collective. But it's maybe this crisis it can be the opportunity to be more collective, to have a fight together, and I think to have a critic, which is a very a critic, you have to be collected. It's very hard to do that, I know, but I think it's the point.
I'd just like to mention one of your statistics, if I may, which was that the turnover in 2013 for Louis Vuitton LMVH was 2.7 billion euros, which is why they could just about afford to put on the Courtauld collection, I think. And that was just for the watches and jewelry department. I think that actually, even though I think I can write about capitalism when necessary and so forth, these really vast sums are really beyond our imagining, these enormous turnovers that produce the commodity world in which we are swimming or walking or being tourists. Even, you know, I mean, even the frame, Harry, of your exhibition in Venice, and many of us, our continued knowledge of Venice Biennales and so forth, it's really quite extraordinary if you are able to take that larger statistical view. And I think the whole book is an attempt to actually take this very large view and make this very comprehensive slice through something which concerns us all at a particular time. Harry, do you have any more burning questions, or shall we begin to think of concluding?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I don't have any questions. I do have some burning, just last comments before
Yes.
you wrap up.
Please go ahead.
The first has got to be, surely, you know, go and buy the book.
Yes, it's lovely to see it. I was going to ask Arnaud to wave it. Yes. Available
in, I mean, well, online at the moment, because none of the shops are open, of course, but Waterstones for sure. Of course, the extract, for those who haven't already read it, is going to be, remains available within our host page, our Vital Exhaustion host page, which has just gone live today, within the Courtauld Institute Research
Forum events, Research Forum events. Yeah, click on the left-hand side.
Where you'll also find in a couple of days' time an edited version of this talk. And just to say, we have a lot coming up over the next few weeks, but as I already mentioned, we've got a fabulous project with Ed Forney-Ellis and an interview with Roja Farkas, who is the founding director of Arcadia Missa, in the next few days. So please do keep an eye out for that on the socials, and stay tuned.
And I'd actually like to congratulate you, Harry, for this persistence with which you have pursued very distinguished people, and they've said yes, like Arnaud, who launches our series, and other artists. And there's a very healthy mix of old and young artists, because I've actually seen the program. I'd like to thank you very, very much, Harry, because this is a kind of add-on initiative. It's not a one-off Research Forum event. So I hope we will have created some converts and some great interest and some even extra reading for our busy students. And Arnaud, once again, we can't thank you enough for participating in this double whammy, the investigation of your great book, Enrichment, with Luc Boltansky, whom we thank in absentia, and your launch of the Vital Exhaustion series. So with that, thank you very, very much, everybody. And thanks again to the Research Forum, who've given us a precious little bit of extra time. Thank you all very much, and see you at Harry's next event. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.